Speaking of moments, you've been, as you mentioned, your career with the Fever. First six, though, were tough, obviously. They weren't as easy. You guys have made the playoffs the last two. What's been the big turnaround? How have you viewed the way the team has grown organically?
Then you bring in Caitlin, who changed the world, changed the dynamic of basketball. And as a friend and as a player, you grow to appreciate her because, certain doors have opened because she's come to the Fever, and you have to respect that. And I love the teammate and person in her because she's accepted it with so much grace and even welcomed us with open arms to, make this thing happen. So I think it just took a lot of big pieces to make,
Welcome back to the Clark Update, WNBA fans. Something major is unfolding, and this time, Kelsey Mitchell is at the center of the conversation. After months of speculation surrounding Caitlin Clark&Sophie Cunningham, and the growing tension across the league, Mitchell's comments have given fans even more to talk about. But what exactly did she say, and why are people reading so much into it? Before we get into that, let's take a step back. If you only followed the headlines, you might think everything surrounding Caitlin Clark has simply been part of normal basketball competition. A highly touted rookie enters the league, veterans test her, emotions run high, and the media turns every moment into a storyline. That explanation sounds reasonable. But many fans have felt there was something more complicated happening beneath the surface. Throughout Clark's arrival in the WNBA, there have been controversial plays, heated exchanges, pointed interviews, social media debates, and moments that sparked intense reactions from fans. Some viewed those incidents as ordinary competitive behavior. Others believed they represented something bigger. That is where the speculation began. Fans started examining everything from post-game comments to body language, from interviews to social media interactions. Online discussions exploded as supporters attempted to connect moments that, individually, might not have meant much. Of course, there is an important distinction here: speculation is not proof. There is no established evidence of a coordinated league-wide campaign to undermine Clark. Much of that narrative has been created and amplified by fans interpreting events through their own perspectives. Still, the questions surrounding Clark have become impossible to ignore. Why has her arrival created such an intense reaction? Why does nearly every controversial moment involving her become a national conversation? And why has Kelsey Mitchell become such an important figure in that discussion? To understand that, we have to look at Mitchell's history with the Indiana Fever. Long before Clark arrived in Indiana, Mitchell was one of the faces of the franchise. Drafted in 2018, she entered the WNBA with enormous expectations. But her early years in Indiana were anything but easy. The Fever struggled through prolonged periods of losing basketball, coaching changes, roster turnover, and constant rebuilding. Mitchell remained. Season after season, she took the court for a franchise searching for an identity. She became one of the team's most reliable scorers and one of its most recognizable players. That history matters. Imagine spending years trying to help rebuild a struggling franchise, only to watch a rookie arrive and immediately become one of the biggest stars in women's basketball. That could create tension. It could also create opportunity. For Mitchell, however, Clark's arrival ultimately became part of a much larger transformation for the Fever. Suddenly, Indiana was receiving attention that it had not experienced in years. National broadcasts increased. Crowds grew. Merchandise became a major story. Every Fever game seemed to attract another wave of attention. And while Clark received much of the spotlight, Mitchell benefited from playing alongside a player capable of changing the environment around the entire franchise. That is why the idea that Mitchell could become the center of an internal conflict is so interesting. The theory suggests that if someone wanted to slow Clark's rise, the obvious target would not necessarily be Clark herself. It would be the people around her. The logic behind that theory is simple: create frustration inside the locker room, encourage resentment over attention and opportunities, and eventually weaken the chemistry between teammates. But again, there is no confirmed evidence that such a coordinated strategy actually existed. What we do know is that professional sports locker rooms can be complicated places. Players have different personalities, different careers, different expectations, and different levels of recognition. When a young superstar enters the picture, the balance of attention can change overnight. That is exactly what happened in Indiana. Clark became the centerpiece of one of the biggest stories in sports. Mitchell, meanwhile, had spent years earning her place with the Fever. So what did Mitchell actually do? Instead of publicly turning against Clark, she repeatedly demonstrated that she could coexist with the rookie and contribute to the team's new direction. That is what makes Mitchell so important to this story. If anyone had a reason to feel overlooked, fans could understand why it might be her. Yet her actions did not provide the clear evidence that critics were looking for. Rather than becoming a source of division, Mitchell became one of the players capable of helping stabilize the Fever. And that is where the narrative takes an unexpected turn. The same player some fans imagined could become the centerpiece of an anti-Clark movement instead became one of the most important pieces of Clark's development in Indiana. Their relationship was not perfect. No teammate relationship is. There were difficult games, missed passes, emotional moments, disagreements, and plenty of normal competitive frustration. But those moments do not automatically prove hostility. Basketball is an emotional sport. Players can disagree and still respect one another. They can criticize each other and still be teammates. They can have tense moments on the court without secretly participating in some larger conspiracy. That distinction is especially important when dealing with Clark. Because Clark is not an ordinary rookie. Her arrival created unprecedented attention. Every reaction to her became content. Every foul became a debate. Every comment could become a headline. Every teammate interaction could be analyzed by millions of people. That level of scrutiny can make ordinary basketball moments appear far more significant than they actually are. And Kelsey Mitchell knows something about pressure. She experienced years of playing for a struggling franchise without receiving the same level of national attention that Clark received almost immediately. Yet when the Fever finally began turning a corner, Mitchell was still there. That gives her perspective that few other players on the roster possess. She understands what the franchise was before Clark arrived. She understands what it became after Clark arrived. And perhaps most importantly, she understands that the Fever does not have to choose between the two. Clark's success does not erase Mitchell's contribution. Mitchell's importance does not diminish Clark's impact. The two can exist at the same time. That may be the biggest lesson from the entire controversy. Fans sometimes treat sports narratives like they need a hero and a villain. If one player rises, someone else must be losing. If one teammate receives attention, another must be angry. If two players have a difficult moment, there must be a hidden feud. Real locker rooms are rarely that simple. The Fever's transformation demonstrates why. Clark brought unprecedented attention. Mitchell brought experience, scoring ability, and years of knowledge about the organization. Other players contributed defense, rebounding, leadership, and chemistry. The team's evolution was never about one person alone. That is also why Mitchell's comments carry so much weight. When a veteran who has spent years with a franchise speaks about the team's direction, fans naturally listen. Her words can influence how people interpret the relationship between the old Fever and the new Fever. But there is a danger in taking every statement and turning it into evidence of a secret agenda. Sometimes a comment is simply a comment. Sometimes a competitive exchange is simply competition. And sometimes fans see patterns because they are already expecting a pattern to exist. The Caitlin Clark era has created one of the most passionate fan communities in women's basketball. That passion has helped drive unprecedented attention toward the WNBA. But passion can also make every disagreement feel bigger. That is why the Kelsey Mitchell story is so fascinating. She represents the bridge between two versions of the Indiana Fever. There was the Fever before Clark, a team fighting through years of disappointment. Then there was the Fever after Clark, a franchise suddenly placed under a global spotlight. Mitchell experienced both worlds. And rather than being pushed aside by Clark's arrival, she became part of the transformation. That does not mean every interaction between the two players has been perfect. It does not mean every controversy should be dismissed. It certainly does not mean fans cannot question what they see. But it does mean we should separate confirmed facts from speculation. There is no verified evidence that Mitchell was recruited into a secret locker room uprising against Clark. There is no confirmed proof of a coordinated effort by veterans to destroy Clark's influence inside Indiana. Those claims remain theories fueled largely by online discussion. What is real is the pressure. What is real is the unprecedented attention. What is real is that Clark entered the league carrying enormous expectations. And what is also real is that Mitchell had already spent years carrying the Fever through difficult seasons. Those two realities collided when Clark arrived. The result was bound to create headlines. Perhaps the most surprising part of the story is that the player many imagined could become an obstacle to Clark instead became part of the foundation surrounding her. Mitchell did not need to surrender her identity for Clark to succeed. Clark did not need to diminish Mitchell for the Fever to become relevant. Both players could benefit from the same transformation. And that may be the real story hiding underneath all the noise. The WNBA is entering a new era, and the attention surrounding Clark is changing the league in ways that extend far beyond one player. Veterans are being introduced to new audiences. Teams are gaining unprecedented visibility. Rivalries are becoming larger. And players who spent years without national attention are suddenly part of conversations that reach millions of fans. Kelsey Mitchell is one of those players. Her journey did not begin with Caitlin Clark. It began years earlier, when she entered Indiana hoping to help rebuild a struggling franchise. Clark's arrival changed the scale of the spotlight, but it did not erase everything that came before her. Instead, the challenge for the Fever has been figuring out how to combine the experience of players like Mitchell with the extraordinary talent and attention surrounding Clark. So when you hear the latest debate about Kelsey Mitchell, Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, or alleged locker room tension, remember one thing. There is a difference between what we know and what fans believe. The drama may be real. The emotions may be real. The competitive tension may be real. But the idea of a secret coordinated operation remains unproven. And until actual evidence emerges, it is better to treat that part of the story as speculation rather than fact. What we can say with confidence is that Kelsey Mitchell's role in the Fever's transformation is impossible to overlook. She was there before the spotlight. She remained when the franchise struggled. And when Caitlin Clark arrived, Mitchell became part of a new chapter in Indiana basketball. Maybe that is the twist nobody expected. The player some imagined could be used to divide the Fever may have instead helped hold it together. And as the WNBA continues changing, that relationship could become one of the most important stories to watch. Because this chapter is far from over. The type of contribution that never appears on a stat sheet. For years, Kelsey Mitchell became one of the Indiana Fever's most dependable pillars. She remained committed through losing seasons, coaching changes, roster turnover, and years when the franchise struggled to attract national attention. She kept showing up, kept competing, and kept believing that the Fever could eventually become relevant again. Then Caitlin Clark arrived. Almost overnight, the story changed. The same franchise Mitchell had spent years helping carry suddenly had a new face, a new source of attention, and a rookie who entered the league with an extraordinary spotlight already following her. Clark was immediately portrayed as the player who could help transform the Fever and potentially reshape the WNBA itself. For outsiders, it was easy to imagine how complicated that transition might have been. Mitchell had been one of Indiana's most recognizable players for years. Now, much of the attention surrounding the franchise was centered on someone else. That is precisely why some fans developed the theory that Mitchell could become the key to an alleged anti-Clark movement. The theory was straightforward. If someone wanted to create tension inside Indiana, why not approach the veteran who had already spent years carrying the franchise? Why not appeal to the possibility that she might feel overlooked after giving so much to the team? The assumption was that Mitchell might secretly resent Clark's immediate popularity. Maybe she would question the attention. Maybe she would push back against the hype. Maybe she would feel that Clark had not yet earned the level of recognition that Mitchell had spent years working toward. From a purely strategic perspective, it sounded plausible. Mitchell had experience. She had credibility. Her teammates respected her, and fans knew her history with the organization. If she publicly questioned Clark's position or expressed frustration about the attention surrounding the rookie, people would likely listen. That would make Mitchell an ideal voice for anyone attempting to create division. But there was one major problem with that theory. They misunderstood Kelsey Mitchell. Years of adversity had not made her bitter about the Fever's future. They had made her protective of it. Mitchell had already experienced what it was like to play for a franchise that struggled to generate excitement. She knew what it meant to walk into an arena where the national spotlight was somewhere else. She knew how difficult it was to remain committed when victories were rare and rebuilding seemed endless. So when Clark arrived, Mitchell did not necessarily see a threat. She could see an opportunity. Instead of viewing Clark as the person taking her spotlight, Mitchell could view her as another piece of the future she had spent years waiting for. That distinction changes the entire story. Mitchell did not need to fight Clark for attention. She wanted the Fever to win. She wanted the franchise to become relevant. She wanted the fans to have something to believe in again. And if Clark could help make that happen, then Mitchell had every reason to embrace the change rather than resist it. That is what made the theory surrounding her so vulnerable. The people who supposedly believed Mitchell could be turned against Clark were relying on an outdated understanding of leadership. They assumed leadership was about protecting personal status. But Mitchell's version of leadership appeared to be much bigger than that. She had already spent years proving that she cared about the franchise beyond individual recognition. So when the moment came for Mitchell to speak publicly about her new rookie teammate, the response was not what the critics expected. Instead of complaining about Clark's popularity, Mitchell highlighted what her arrival meant for the team and the league. Instead of treating Clark as a rival, she recognized the impact the rookie was having. And instead of feeding the narrative that Clark was receiving attention she had not earned, Mitchell helped reinforce the idea that the attention surrounding her could benefit everyone. That was the moment the entire theory began to lose momentum. Because if the plan depended on Mitchell becoming the voice of resentment, it needed Mitchell to actually feel resentful. but that was never established. And without that foundation, the theory had nowhere to go. Mitchell's perspective was especially powerful because of her history. She knew exactly what the Fever looked like before Clark. She knew how difficult it was to generate excitement around the franchise. She knew what it felt like to play season after season without the level of national attention that suddenly surrounded Indiana. So when Clark arrived and transformed the conversation, Mitchell had first-hand knowledge of what that transformation meant. This was not simply about one player getting more publicity. It was about an entire organization receiving a level of attention it had been waiting for. That is why Mitchell's support mattered. It challenged the assumption that established players and incoming stars must automatically compete for recognition. They do not. A veteran can maintain her identity while helping a young star succeed. A rookie can receive enormous attention without disrespecting the players who came before her. And a team can become bigger without erasing its history. That may be the real lesson behind the Mitchell-Clark relationship. But once Mitchell refused to fit the expected narrative, another question emerged. If there really was an effort to create tension around Clark, who was behind it? This is where the story becomes much less certain. There has been no confirmed evidence of a coordinated operation involving WNBA players attempting to undermine Clark from inside the Fever locker room. There has been no public confession, no documented plan, and no verified evidence proving that veterans secretly organized against her. What exists instead is speculation. Fans have examined interviews, podcasts, press conferences, social media posts, and controversial moments. Some have attempted to connect statements made by prominent figures in women's basketball to a broader pattern of resistance toward Clark. Two names that have frequently appeared in those online discussions are WNBA legend Sheryl Swoopes and Las Vegas Aces star Aya Wilson. But it is essential to separate fan theories from established facts. Comments about rookies earning respect, debates about Clark's popularity, or criticism of the media attention surrounding her do not automatically prove a coordinated campaign. Players can disagree. Veterans can defend the history of their league. Stars can question the way the media covers a particular athlete. None of those things, by themselves, establish a secret plan. Yet the reason the theory became so powerful is because the broader issue behind it is real. The WNBA is experiencing a generational transition. Players from an earlier era spent years building the league when national attention was limited. They fought for better salaries, better facilities, stronger media coverage, and greater recognition. Many of them had to work extremely hard simply to convince people that women's professional basketball deserved the same level of respect as other major sports. Then came a new generation. Players such as Clark entered the professional game with massive college followings, social media audiences, endorsement opportunities, and unprecedented media attention. That transition was always going to create complicated emotions. For some longtime players, the sudden explosion of attention around a newcomer could feel strange. Not necessarily because they disliked the newcomer. Not necessarily because they were jealous. But because they remembered how different the league looked when they were trying to build it. That is where the conversation becomes much more interesting than a simple good versus bad storyline. Maybe there was never a coordinated conspiracy. Maybe there was simply a collision between generations. One generation spent years building the foundation. Another arrived at exactly the right moment to accelerate the growth. Those two realities can exist together. The veterans deserve recognition for what they built. The newcomers deserve recognition for what they are doing now. The success of one generation does not erase the accomplishments of another. And perhaps that is why the controversy surrounding Clark became so intense. She represented more than a talented rookie. She represented change. Her arrival brought enormous attention to the league, and that attention forced people to look more closely at the relationship between the WNBA's past and its future. Suddenly, conversations about legacy were happening alongside conversations about ratings, attendance, sponsorships, media rights, and global popularity. Every disagreement became part of that larger debate. Every comment could be interpreted as either support for the old guard or resistance to the new generation. Social media amplified everything. A sentence that might have disappeared after a normal post-game interview could suddenly become a viral clip. A facial expression could be analyzed. A short response could be interpreted as a hidden message. A disagreement could become evidence of a rivalry. And once fans started connecting those moments, the theory of a larger conflict became almost impossible to stop. But perception and proof are two different things. That distinction matters. Because regardless of whether there was ever a coordinated effort to undermine Clark, the conversation exposed something important about the WNBA. The league is changing rapidly. And every period of rapid change creates uncertainty. For years, established players were the faces of the league. They carried the sport through difficult periods and helped create the foundation that allowed today's stars to receive unprecedented attention. Now, the spotlight is shifting. New players are entering the league with massive audiences already waiting for them. That does not mean the old generation has failed. It means the sport has reached a new stage. And Kelsey Mitchell may represent the perfect bridge between those two worlds. She understands what the Fever was before Clark. She understands what the franchise became after Clark. And instead of treating those two eras as enemies, she has the opportunity to connect them. That is why her response carries so much significance. If Mitchell had openly embraced resentment, the story would have been very different. Instead, she demonstrated that a veteran can recognize the value of a superstar without surrendering her own importance. She can celebrate Clark while still remembering everything she contributed. She can welcome change without forgetting the past. And that may be the strongest answer to the entire controversy. The future of the WNBA does not have to belong exclusively to one generation. The players who built the foundation and the players now expanding the league can both matter. Caitlin Clark's arrival did not erase Kelsey Mitchell's story. It added another chapter to it. And perhaps that is what makes this moment so significant. The WNBA is no longer simply asking who its next star will be. It is figuring out how to carry its history into a much larger future. The old guard built the foundation. The new generation is expanding the house. And somewhere between those two worlds stands Kelsey Mitchell, a player who spent years waiting for the Fever to become relevant and suddenly found herself playing alongside one of the biggest names the sport had ever seen. Whatever the online theories claim, that reality is far more interesting than any conspiracy. Because the real story is not about one player stealing another player's spotlight. It is about what happens when the spotlight becomes big enough for everyone to share it. And if Mitchell's career has taught us anything, it is that she understands the value of staying the course. She waited through the losing seasons. She endured the uncertainty. She kept showing up. Now the Fever has something it has not had in a long time: momentum. And instead of fighting against that momentum, Mitchell has become part of it. That may ultimately be the most important twist of all. For many veterans, the transition was deeply personal. They entered the WNBA when professional women's basketball had far fewer resources. Sponsorship opportunities were limited, attendance could be unpredictable, and national media coverage came and went. Players fought for recognition while traveling under demanding schedules and earning far less than today's stars. More importantly, they carried the responsibility of proving that women's professional basketball deserved a permanent place in the sports landscape. Then everything started changing. Imagine spending years fighting for attention, only to watch a rookie enter the league and immediately receive massive endorsement opportunities, national headlines, and millions of fans. For some longtime players, that transformation could feel complicated. It was not necessarily about jealousy. It was about perspective. They remembered what the league looked like before the explosion of interest. They remembered playing in smaller arenas, working to attract sponsors, and trying to convince the broader sports world to take them seriously. Then came Caitlin Clark. She entered the WNBA with a massive following already established through college basketball, social media, nil opportunities, and national television exposure. To some observers, that looked like an entirely different path into professional basketball. But to the younger generation, it was not disrespect. It was progress. Players such as Clark and other rising stars were entering a league where the doors were already beginning to open wider. The increased attention did not necessarily mean there was less room for established players. In fact, the opposite could be true. More fans could mean larger crowds. More television viewers could mean stronger media deals. More sponsors could mean more opportunities for everyone. And more attention could help transform the WNBA from a league fighting for recognition into a major professional sports product. That became the heart of the generational debate. Legacy versus momentum. The veterans wanted their contributions recognized. The younger generation wanted the freedom to move forward without being defined entirely by what came before. But underneath those differences was a shared objective. Both groups wanted the WNBA to succeed. That is what made the Indiana Fever such an interesting representation of the transition. Inside one locker room, two eras were suddenly sharing the same space. Kelsey Mitchell represented the veteran perspective. She had experienced the difficult years firsthand. She understood what it meant to keep competing while the franchise struggled for relevance. Caitlin Clark represented the new wave of attention. Aaliyah Boston represented another part of the young core, a player who had already experienced the spotlight before Clark arrived. And together, the group demonstrated that different generations did not have to become enemies. That became increasingly important as the Fever found itself at the center of the basketball world. Instead of allowing the contrast between generations to fracture the locker room, the team had an opportunity to turn those differences into an advantage. Mitchell brought experience. Clark brought enormous attention. Boston brought her own professional experience and leadership. Other teammates added their own strengths. The result was not necessarily a battle for territory. It was a collection of different pieces attempting to build something bigger. That is why the idea of an Indiana firewall became so compelling in the broader narrative. Rather than allowing outside criticism or speculation to divide them, the Fever could respond with unity. And Mitchell was particularly important because of her history. She was not someone who needed to prove that she belonged. She had already spent years doing that. Her willingness to embrace Clark therefore carried a different kind of weight. It suggested that recognizing a new superstar did not require a veteran to surrender her own importance. Mitchell could respect what Clark was bringing to the franchise while still knowing exactly what she had contributed. That is where the alleged anti-Clark narrative began to lose its power. The theory depended on the assumption that old-fashioned locker room politics would still work. Create jealousy. Encourage resentment. Make the rookie feel isolated. Convince veterans that they were losing something because the newcomer was gaining attention. On paper, that strategy might sound effective. But it depends on one crucial ingredient. The players have to believe they are competing against each other. In Indiana, the evidence pointed toward something more complicated. The players had a common reason to succeed. They wanted the Fever to win. They wanted the franchise to become relevant. And they wanted the increased attention surrounding the team to translate into something positive. That made division much harder. Kelsey Mitchell's support for Clark became symbolic of that shift. Rather than reinforcing the idea that Clark's popularity was a threat, Mitchell could acknowledge the benefits of having a player capable of attracting new fans and new attention. That does not mean every interaction between teammates was perfect. Professional sports never work that way. There will always be disagreements, missed opportunities, frustrations, and moments of competitive emotion. But those moments should not automatically be interpreted as evidence of a larger conspiracy. Sometimes a difficult moment is simply a difficult moment. What changed was the environment around it. The WNBA itself was evolving. New media agreements, increased attendance, social media growth, corporate sponsorships, and rising fan interest were creating opportunities that were difficult to imagine during some veterans' early careers. The financial picture was changing. The audience was changing. And the league's cultural influence was expanding. That meant Clark's popularity did not necessarily have to come at someone else's expense. The pie was becoming larger. And when the pie grows, more people can benefit. That may have been one of the biggest misconceptions surrounding the entire controversy. The old model treated attention as something scarce. If one player received more, someone else received less. But the new WNBA could operate differently. One superstar could bring millions of viewers to a game, and those viewers might discover another player. A viral moment involving Clark could lead fans to learn about Mitchell, Boston, or another WNBA star. A sold-out arena could benefit the entire organization. A major sponsorship could increase the league's overall value. The rising tide could lift more than one player. That is why the traditional playbook of whispers, subtle criticism, and attempts to control the spotlight becomes less effective in a rapidly expanding league. There is simply more attention to go around. And perhaps that is why the most important rivalry is no longer between generations. It is between the WNBA's potential and the limitations of its past. The old guard fought to keep the league alive. The new guard is fighting to make it bigger. Those goals are not opposites. They are connected. Without the veterans, there would be no foundation. Without the new generation, the league might not reach its next level. The future requires both. That is also why the Fever's chemistry matters. Indiana became a real-world example of what happens when veterans and young stars decide that cooperation is more valuable than competition for attention. Mitchell did not have to become Clark's opponent. Clark did not have to erase Mitchell's legacy. Boston did not have to choose sides. The team could allow each player to occupy a different role within the same larger story. And that is a much more sustainable model for the WNBA. The season may have begun with fans expecting the usual headlines: standout performances, difficult road games, playoff races, injuries, rivalries, and individual milestones. Instead, one of the biggest conversations became much larger than basketball. It became a conversation about what the WNBA is becoming. Can the league honor the players who built its foundation while embracing the stars who are taking it into a new era? Can veterans receive the respect they deserve without expecting newcomers to apologize for their success? Can young stars receive unprecedented attention without ignoring the players who made that attention possible? Those are the questions that matter. And Kelsey Mitchell's role makes the discussion especially compelling. She has one foot in both worlds. She remembers the difficult years. She understands what it means to fight for relevance. But she also recognizes the opportunities created by the league's growth. That makes her an important bridge between generations. If there was ever an opportunity for an internal divide to take hold, it was when the Fever suddenly became one of the most discussed teams in basketball. Yet the response did not have to be division. It could be collaboration. That may ultimately be the lesson from everything surrounding Clark and Mitchell. The future does not belong exclusively to the veterans. It does not belong exclusively to the rookies. It belongs to the people who understand how to combine experience with ambition. The veterans built the road. The new generation is traveling faster on it. And there is no reason both groups cannot benefit from the journey. That is why the supposed attempt to weaken the Fever, whether real, exaggerated, or simply a product of online speculation, ultimately reveals something bigger. The league has changed. The old rules of attention no longer apply in the same way. A player's success can now create opportunities for teammates. A team's popularity can increase the value of an entire roster. And one superstar's arrival can introduce millions of people to a sport they previously ignored. The challenge is making sure that growth does not erase history. The veterans who fought through years of limited attention deserve recognition. They helped create the conditions that made the current explosion possible. At the same time, younger players should not be expected to minimize their success simply because previous generations had fewer opportunities. Progress is supposed to create opportunities that once did not exist. That is the point. Caitlin Clark should not have to apologize for attracting attention. Kelsey Mitchell should not have to apologize for demanding recognition for everything she contributed before Clark arrived. Both stories can be true. Both careers can matter. And both generations can help shape what comes next. That may be the real transformation happening in the WNBA. The spotlight is getting brighter. But a brighter spotlight does not have to leave everyone else in the dark. It can illuminate the entire league. It can introduce longtime stars to new fans. It can give younger players a larger platform. It can reward the veterans who helped build the foundation. And it can create opportunities that did not exist before. So perhaps the biggest question is not whether Kelsey Mitchell chose Clark over the veterans. Maybe the real question is whether she recognized that there was never a reason to choose at all. She could honor the past while supporting the future.